massive stone structure of the Burlington County Prison stands as a grim sentinel over the historic town of Mount Holly in New Jersey. Built in the early years of the 19th century, this imposing fortress was designed to handle the growing criminal element of a young nation. The gray stone walls rise high into the sky and cast long shadows that seem to swallow the light of the sun even on the brightest days. Visitors who approach the heavy iron gates often report a sudden drop in temperature and an overwhelming sense of dread that settles deep in their bones. This is not merely a building of mortar and rock, but a vessel for the suffering and despair of thousands who were locked within. The history here is written in blood, and the echoes of the condemned still reverberate through the cold corridors, causing the bravest souls to tremble. The architect responsible for this daunting edifice was a man named Robert Mills, who would later gain fame for designing the Washington Monument in the capital city. Robert Mills envisioned a prison that was fireproof and secure, but also humane compared to the barbaric dungeons of the past. He utilized poured concrete and heavy masonry to create a structure that could withstand the ravages of time and the fury of desperate men. Despite his intentions to create a place of reform, the prison quickly became a warehouse for misery. The thick walls trapped not only the physical bodies of the inmates, but also the intense emotional energy of their anguish. The design included a central hallway with cells flanking either side, which allowed sound to travel in a peculiar and haunting manner throughout the entire building. Construction began in the year 1810 and was completed the following year, making it the oldest prison in the United States, currently operating as a museum. For over 150 years, the Burlington County Prison held petty thieves and violent murderers, and those awaiting the final drop of the hangman noose. The front facade features an imposing rusticated stonework that was intended to intimidate anyone who looked upon it. The soaring arched windows give the illusion of a grand manor, but the iron bars visible behind the glass tell a different story. It was a place where hope was stripped away the moment the heavy oak doors slammed shut. The very atmosphere of the location seems to have absorbed the century and a half of fear that permeated the daily lives of its inhabitants. Inside the prison, the air is thick with a stale and musty odor that no amount of cleaning can fully eradicate. The main corridor stretches out like the throat of a beast, leading to the cramped and dark cells where prisoners spent their days in solitude. Robert Mills designed the ventilation system to carry fresh air to the cells. But in the depths of winter, the stone walls radiated a bone-chilling cold. In the sweltering heat of summer, the prison became a stifling oven where tempers flared and violence erupted with little provocation. The acoustics of the barrel-vaulted ceilings meant that a whisper at one end of the hall could be heard clearly at the other. This lack of privacy added a layer of psychological torture to the physical confinement. One of the most notorious features of the Burlington County Prison is the area known simply as the dungeon, located in the center of the top floor rather than the basement. This maximum security section was reserved for the most dangerous and unruly offenders. The cell known as the dungeon was devoid of light and proper ventilation, creating a sensory deprivation chamber that broke the minds of many men. Those who were thrown into this black void were often left for days with nothing but their own dark thoughts for company. It is in this oppressive space that many visitors claim to feel a heavy weight pressing down on their chests. Some have reported the sensation of unseen hands grabbing at their clothing or scratching their skin in the pitch black darkness. The history of capital punishment at the prison is dark and filled with tales of botched executions and lingering spirits. The prison yard was the site of numerous hangings, where the condemned took their final breaths before a public crowd. In the early days, these executions were spectacles attended by families and children who watched the grim proceedings with morbid curiosity. The wooden gallows were erected in the courtyard, and the sound of the trapdoor opening echoed off the high stone walls. For those awaiting their turn on death, the sounds of the carpentry work outside their windows served as a terrifying countdown to their demise. The fear of death permeated the very stones of the building, leaving a residual energy that sensitive individuals can still feel today. Perhaps the most famous resident of the Burlington County Prison was a man named Joel Clough, who arrived in the year 1833. Joel Clough had been convicted of the brutal murder of a woman named Mary Hamilton, who had rejected his romantic advances. His crime was one of passion and obsession, and it shocked the local community with its violence. Joel Clough was sentenced to death and placed in the dungeon cell to await his execution. During his confinement, he reportedly spiraled into madness and claimed that he could hear the voice of his victim taunting him from the shadows. His wails of torment echoed through the prison at night, keeping the other inmates and the guards awake with his terrifying screams. The conditions of Joel Clough in the dungeon were horrific, even by the standards of the 19th century. He was chained to the floor in the center of the room to prevent him from pacing or reaching the walls. The darkness was absolute, and the silence was only broken by the sound of his own breathing and the rattling of his chains. Guards who brought him his meager rations reported that Joel Clough would stare wildly into the corners of the cell, conversing with unseen entities. He became a shell of a man, consumed by guilt and the terror of his impending death. The intense emotional output of his final days is believed to have imprinted a permanent scar on the fabric of the prison, ensuring his presence would never leave. As the date of his execution approached, Joel Clough made a desperate attempt to escape his stone tomb. He managed to fashion a crude key or tool, possibly from a spoon or a piece of metal he had scavenged. With painstaking effort, he worked at the lock of his shackles and the heavy iron door of the dungeon. Legends say that he nearly succeeded in freeing himself, but was discovered by a vigilant guard just before he could slip away. The failed escape only resulted in stricter measures and heavier chains being applied to his wasted frame. His hope was extinguished and replaced by a cold resolve to meet his fate. This desperation permeates the dungeon cell to this day, causing visitors to feel a sudden urge to flee. The execution of Joel Clough was a major event in Mount Holly, drawing a massive crowd to the prison walls. On the morning of his death, he was led from the dungeon and marched down the main corridor towards the gallows in the yard. Witnesses described him as looking pale and gaunt with eyes that seemed to see beyond the physical world. He climbed the steps to the platform without speaking a final word to the gathered masses. When the trapdoor swung open, Joel Clough dropped into eternity, but his spirit refused to move on. Almost immediately after his body was cut down, stories began to circulate that he was still residing in the cell where he had spent his final agonizing weeks. It was not long after the death of Joel Clough that the guards began to report strange occurrences in the upper levels of the prison. Night watchmen would hear the distinct sound of clinking chains coming from the empty dungeon cell. When they investigated the noise, they found the room vacant and the heavy door securely locked. Some reported seeing a shadowy figure crouching in the corner, the same spot where Joel Clough had been chained. The air in the cell would turn freezing cold, and the flame of their lanterns would flicker and die without a draft. The legend of the ghost of Joel Clough was born, and he became the most feared permanent resident of the Burlington County Prison. Over the decades, the haunting activity seemed to spread from the dungeon to other areas of the massive stone building. In the basement, where the workshop and the kitchen were located, prisoners often complained of being watched by a tall man in a uniform. This apparition was believed to be a former guard who had died while on duty and continued his rounds in the afterlife. Inmates working in the laundry area would report tools moving on their own and baskets of clothes being overturned by invisible hands. The basement, with its low ceilings and damp atmosphere, became a place that many feared to enter alone. The oppression in the air was palpable, causing a tightness in the chest that only lifted once one returned to the upper floors. The architecture of Robert Mills, with its focus on acoustics, played a significant role in the amplification of fear within the prison. The central rotunda allowed sounds from the basement to drift up to the third floor, creating a confusing auditory landscape. A scream from a prisoner being disciplined in the lower levels would sound as if it were coming from the cell right next door. This design flaw meant that the suffering of one man became the torment of all. During the quiet hours of the night, the prison came alive with a symphony of phantom noises. Footsteps would echo on the metal walkways when no one was walking, and cell doors would slam shut with a violent clang when they should have been locked. By the mid-20th century, the Burlington County Prison was severely overcrowded and falling into disrepair. The stone walls that had once been state-of-the-art were now crumbling, and the facilities were woefully inadequate for the modern era. Tensions ran high among the inmate population, leading to riots and violent altercations that stained the floors with fresh blood. The negative energy accumulated over a century of misery seemed to feed the darker impulses of the men locked inside. Suicides became more common as prisoners lost hope of ever leaving the gray fortress alive. Each tragic death added another layer to the spectral population that walked the halls alongside the living. In the year 1965, the prison was finally closed, and the inmates were transferred to a new facility. The heavy iron doors were locked for what was thought to be the final time, and the building was left to the dust and the ghosts. However, the silence did not last long, as the structure was designated a historic landmark, and plans were made to convert it into a museum. During the restoration process, workmen and contractors experienced a terrifying array of paranormal activity. Tools that were set down would vanish only to reappear in locked rooms on different floors. Ladders would be shaken by unseen hands, and heavy footsteps would approach workers from behind only to fade away when they turned to look. One particular incident during the renovation involved a painter who was working alone in the third floor corridor near the dungeon. He reported feeling a sudden drop in temperature, followed by the smell of stale tobacco smoke. When he looked up, he saw a solid black shadow standing at the end of the hall, blocking his exit. The figure seemed to be wearing a brimmed hat and a long coat reminiscent of the guards from the 19th century. Terrified, the painter dropped his brush and fled the building, refusing to return to the job site. This sighting aligns with many reports from former inmates who claimed to see the smoking guard patrolling the death row section at night. The basement of the prison continues to be a hotbed of supernatural activity for the museum staff and visitors. There is a specific area near the old shower room where people often report feeling nauseous and dizzy. Some have described the sensation of hands tightening around their throat, as if they are being strangled by a vengeful spirit. Historical records indicate that this area was the site of several violent attacks between prisoners over the years. The residual anger and aggression seem to have imprinted on the stone walls, creating a hostile environment for the living. Paranormal investigators have recorded aggressive electronic voice phenomena in this location, capturing growls and threats that are not heard by the human ear. The warden of the prison lived in a house connected to the main structure by a passageway, bringing his family into close proximity with the criminals. This unique arrangement meant that the domestic life of the warden was constantly overshadowed by the grim reality of the prison. There are stories of the children of the warden playing in the courtyard, near the gallows, oblivious to the death that had occurred there. Inside the museum today, the area that once served as the office of the warden is often cited as a place of uneasy calm, while the rest of the prison feels chaotic and heavy. The office retains a sense of strict authority. However, visitors still report the feeling of being watched closely, as if the warden is still sitting at his desk, monitoring the halls. The graffiti etched into the walls of the cells serves as a poignant reminder of the humanity that was stripped away in this place. Names and dates and prayers are carved deep into the plaster, and stone preserving the memory of men who are long forgotten. In some of the cells, the graffiti takes a darker turn, with symbols and curses scratched into the surface. One cell in particular is covered in drawings of coffins and skulls believed to be the work of a man waiting for his execution. Museum guests who enter this cell often feel an intense wave of sadness and despair. It is as if the emotion of the artist is still radiating from the walls, infecting anyone who steps into his personal space. A frequent phenomenon reported by visitors is the sound of heavy boots walking on the metal stairs that connect the tiers of cells. The metallic clang is distinct and unmistakable, echoing through the open space of the central block. Guides will often stop their tour to listen as the phantom footsteps ascend from the ground floor to the upper levels. The footsteps are rhythmic and purposeful, suggesting a guard making his rounds rather than a prisoner pacing. This auditory haunting is so common that it has become an accepted part of the daily routine for the staff who work in the museum. They simply acknowledge the presence of the unseen watcher and continue with their duties. In the solitary confinement cells, the atmosphere is incredibly dense and suffocating. These small, windowless rooms were used to punish those who broke the strict rules of the prison. Men were thrown into the darkness for days or weeks, with only bread and water to sustain them. Visitors who step into these cells often panic within seconds, feeling the walls closing in on them. There are reports of people being pushed or shoved by invisible forces, as if the former occupants are angry at the intrusion. The energy in solitary confinement is raw and aggressive, leaving many to wonder if the spirits of the punished are still trapped in the dark. The courtyard where the gallows once stood is now a quiet patch of grass, but the history of the soil is steeped in death. Although the wooden structure is gone. The exact spot where the drop occurred is marked and known. During the anniversary of the execution of Joel Clough and other infamous hangings, people have reported seeing a spectral reenactment of the event. Faint, misty figures have been seen gathering in the yard, and the sound of a crowd murmuring can be heard on the wind. The trauma of the public executions appears to be replayed by the environment itself, a residual haunting that cycles through time. Paranormal investigation teams frequent the Burlington County Prison to document the high level of activity. They have captured countless photographs showing orbs and mists and shadow figures lurking in the cells. One particularly chilling piece of evidence is a thermal video that shows a heat signature sitting on a bunk in an empty cell. The figure appears to be hunched over with its head in its hands, in a posture of utter defeat. When the investigators entered the room, the heat signature vanished, instantly leaving behind a cold spot that measured 20 degrees lower than the surrounding air. This evidence supports the theory that the spirits are intelligent and aware of the living. The third floor remains the most active area of the prison, especially the corridor leading to the dungeon. It is here that the ghost of Joel Clough is said to be most powerful. Witnesses have described a tall, gaunt figure with wild hair peering out from the darkness of the cell. He does not speak, but his eyes convey a depth of malice that freezes the blood. Some have heard a raspy voice whispering, "Get out," or "Help me," when they stand near the iron door. The energy on the third floor is volatile and can shift from calm to terrifying in a matter of seconds. There is a legend among the staff about a female spirit who haunts the administrative section of the prison. She is believed to be the wife of a former warden, or perhaps a matron who worked with the few female prisoners. Her presence is often accompanied by the smell of lavender or floral perfume, which is out of place in the musty building. Unlike the aggressive male spirits, her energy is described as protective and sorrowful. She has been seen standing at the top of the stairs, looking down with a melancholic expression. Some believe she is watching over the lost souls, trying to bring some measure of comfort to the damned. The metal workshops in the basement are filled with old machinery and tools that date back to the early 20th century. It was here that prisoners were forced to work long hours in dangerous conditions. Accidents were common, and fingers or limbs were often lost to the heavy gears. The spirits of the injured workers seem to linger here, attached to the machines that maimed them. Visitors have reported the sound of grinding metal and the hum of engines, even though the power has been cut for decades. The residual memory of the labor and the pain is etched into the very iron of the equipment. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVP recordings taken in the main cell block, often capture the sounds of prison life. The clanging of metal cups on bars, and the murmur of conversations, and the shuffling of feet are commonly heard on playback. These sounds suggest that for the spirits, the prison is still fully operational. They are trapped in a time loop, repeating the mundane and miserable routine of their incarceration. The sheer volume of voices captured on tape indicates that the prison is crowded with the souls of those who died within its walls, or who simply could not leave after their release. One of the most disturbing experiences reported by a visitor involved a physical attack in the shower room. A young man on a tour felt a burning sensation on his back, and when he lifted his shirt, his friends saw 3 distinct scratches appearing on his skin. The scratches were red and welted, as if made by sharp fingernails. The attack was sudden and unprovoked, sending the group fleeing from the basement in terror. This type of physical interaction is rare, but it serves as a potent reminder that the entities within the Burlington County Prison are not harmless. They possess the energy to manifest and to inflict pain on the living. The duality of the site as a museum and a place of tragedy creates a strange tension. Tourists walk through the halls, taking photos and reading plaques, while the invisible residents watch from the shadows. There is a sense that the spirits resent the intrusion, viewing the visitors as spectators to their eternal suffering. This resentment manifests in sudden cold drafts and the feeling of being pushed or tripped. The guides often warn visitors to be respectful and to avoid mocking the history of the prison. Those who treat the site as a joke often find themselves the target of the most intense paranormal activity. Night tour of the prison offer a different perspective, as the darkness amplifies the eerie atmosphere. With only flashlights to guide them, visitors become acutely aware of every sound and movement. The shadows seem to stretch and twist, taking on human shapes that dart into cells when a light is shined upon them. It is during these night tour that the most compelling evidence is often captured. People have reported seeing full-bodied apparitions walking through closed doors or standing on the catwalks above. The veil between the worlds seems to be at its thinnest when the sun goes down and the prison returns to the dark. The lingering dread of the Burlington County Prison is not something that can be easily shaken off after leaving the grounds. Many visitors report feeling drained and exhausted for days after their tour, as if their energy was leached by the hungry spirits. Some have even claimed that a presence followed them home, causing disturbances in their own houses. The stone walls may contain the ghosts for the most part, but the psychological impact of the visit travels with the observer. It is a place that touches the primal fear of confinement and death, leaving a mark on the soul. As the years pass, the legend of the prison only grows stronger with each new report of supernatural activity. The stone fortress remains a monument to a harsh and unforgiving justice system that prioritized punishment over rehabilitation. The souls trapped within are victims of both their own crimes and the brutal conditions of their incarceration. They are the echoes of the condemned, repeating their stories to anyone willing to listen. The Burlington County Prison is a place where the past is not dead, but living and breathing in the cold, dark corners. In the end, the true horror of the Burlington County Prison lies in its timelessness. The prisoners who walked these halls 200 years ago are still here, pacing the same stone floors. The guards who watched over them are still on patrol, ensuring that no one escapes. The cycle of misery continues unbroken by the passage of centuries. For the living, it is a museum of history, but for the dead, it is an eternal cage. And as long as the stone walls stand, the echoes of the condemned will never be silenced. The final impression one takes away is that the building itself is a living entity fed by the emotions of the past. It breathes with the collective sigh of thousands of hopeless men. It watches with the eyes of the guards who spent their lives within its perimeter. It remembers every injustice and every death. When the lights are turned off and the heavy doors are locked for the night, the prison does not sleep. It waits in the darkness, filled with the restless spirits of those who can never check out. The silence that falls over Mount Holly at night is deceptive, for inside the prison, the noise never truly stops. The clinking of chains and the heavy footsteps and the whispered pleas for mercy continue in an endless loop. It is a grim reminder that some stains cannot be washed away, and some doors can never be unlocked. The Burlington County Prison stands as a testament to the darker side of human nature. A stone coffin filled with ghosts who are screaming to be heard.